Robert De Niro. The name alone carries the weight of Hollywood history. For over 5 decades, he has been the face of gritty realism, from Taxi Driver to Raging Bull, from Goodfellas to The Irishman. But behind the controlled fury and quiet intensity that made him a legend lies a story far more complicated. A story of trust broken, friendships shattered, and betrayals so deep they nearly unraveled everything he built. At 77, De Niro has little left to prove. He has Oscars, critical acclaim, and a legacy most actors can only dream of. Yet even the most powerful men in Hollywood cannot escape betrayal. Some came from friends who turned into rivals, others from business partners who drained his fortune, some from relationships that collapsed in very public heartbreak, and a few, perhaps the most painful, came from within the very industry that once crowned him king. Tonight, we peel back the curtain on the 5 betrayals that shaped Robert De Niro's life and career. These are the moments when trust turned toxic, when loyalty dissolved, and when the man who played gangsters and kings discovered that real life was far crueler than any script. Robert Anthony De Niro Jr. was born in August of 1943 in the heart of New York City, the child of 2 artists whose turbulent marriage ended when he was still a toddler. Growing up in Little Italy, De Niro was quiet, introverted, and often retreated into the world of cinema. By his teenage years, he had already fallen in love with acting, sneaking into screenings and studying the way performers moved, spoke, and held the screen. His early career was far from glamorous. In the 1960s, he scraped by on small stage productions and bit parts, but his relentless dedication to the craft soon caught the eye of young directors. The turning point came when he joined forces with Martin Scorsese, a collaboration that would redefine American cinema. Mean Streets announced him as a raw talent, while Taxi Driver solidified his place as the voice of disillusioned America in the 1970s. De Niro's method acting became legendary. He gained weight for Raging Bull, learned Sicilian for The Godfather Part 2, and transformed himself with a devotion that bordered on obsession. His performances earned him 2 Academy Awards and established him as one of the greatest actors of his generation. Yet for all his success, De Niro never fully embraced the spotlight. Unlike many of his peers, he avoided talk shows and tabloid fame. He was fiercely private, focused only on the work. But Hollywood is not built on privacy, it thrives on power, loyalty, and betrayal. And as his star rose higher, so too did the stakes. The very city that had made him its icon would also become the stage for some of the deepest wounds of his personal and professional life. The first betrayal came not from Hollywood producers or shady business partners, but from someone De Niro trusted on a deeply personal level, his longtime wife and partner, Grace Hightower. When De Niro married Grace in 1997, many believed the notoriously private actor had finally found stability. Their marriage, however, was anything but peaceful. Behind the closed doors of their Manhattan penthouse, the relationship became increasingly toxic, marked by fights over money, custody, and lifestyle. For years, De Niro tried to keep the turmoil out of the press. He had always been protective of his children, unwilling to let tabloids feed off his private pain. But in 2018, the marriage crumbled in spectacular fashion, and what followed was a betrayal De Niro never expected. Grace, once his closest confidant, launched a legal battle demanding half of his fortune. The court filings painted De Niro as reckless with money, alleging he spent millions on vacations, fine dining, and luxury. But the truth was more complex. Friends close to De Niro revealed he was fighting to protect the nest egg he had built through decades of relentless work. To him, the betrayal wasn't just about money, it was about trust. The woman who had once stood beside him was now publicly accusing him of financial irresponsibility, tarnishing his reputation as a disciplined, hard-working actor. The divorce became one of the ugliest battles of his career, draining both his finances and his energy. For a man who had always chosen silence over spectacle, the courtroom drama was humiliating. The betrayal stung because it was personal proof that even after years of building walls around his private life, the person closest to him could tear them down from within. For De Niro, the fight with Grace wasn't just the end of a marriage. It was the first major crack in the image he had so carefully protected. And it showed him that betrayal doesn't always come with a headline, it can come from the one person you least expect. Few friendships in Hollywood seemed as natural as that of Robert De Niro and Harvey Keitel. Both were sons of New York, both products of the rough streets of Little Italy, and both helped launch Martin Scorsese's gritty vision of American cinema. In Mean Streets back in 1973, it was Keitel who carried the lead, while De Niro exploded onto the screen in a supporting role that critics could not stop talking about. What began as artistic brotherhood quickly grew into mutual respect and camaraderie off-screen. But success changes everything. As De Niro's star rose, offers that once might have gone to Keitel began flowing De Niro's way. By the late 70s, De Niro was headlining Taxi Driver and winning an Oscar for The Godfather Part 2, while Keitel struggled to find roles of the same magnitude. Jealousy brewed quietly, and according to people close to them, Keitel began to resent the fact that Scorsese increasingly chose De Niro over him. The betrayal came in the form of silence and rejection. Harvey Keitel, once a brother-in-arms, allegedly began distancing himself from De Niro, turning down collaborations and even bad-mouthing him in private circles. Their friendship, which had once symbolized the raw authenticity of 70s cinema, began to fracture under the weight of envy. For De Niro, the sting wasn't professional competition. He understood that actors often fought for the same roles. It was the realization that someone he had admired deeply could let bitterness corrode their bond. They had once been comrades, fighting for recognition against the Hollywood establishment. Now, Keitel seemed more like a rival than a friend. Though the two men would occasionally cross paths in later films, the magic of their early collaboration never returned. What should have been a lifelong brotherhood became another reminder to De Niro. In Hollywood, loyalty often bends under the pressure of fame and fortune. The betrayal of Harvey Keitel was not about one role or one moment. It was about the erosion of trust between two men who had once promised to rise together. In the 1990s, Robert De Niro was at the peak of his power. He was not only an actor but also a producer, co-founding Tribeca Productions and pouring his energy into revitalizing Lower Manhattan through the Tribeca Film Festival. During this period, he crossed paths with Harvey Weinstein and his company Miramax, then one of the most influential forces in independent cinema. At first, it seemed like a promising alliance. Weinstein had the resources, and De Niro had the talent and prestige. Together, they could build something extraordinary. But Weinstein's reputation for ruthless tactics soon bled into their partnership. De Niro, a man who valued artistic integrity, found himself clashing with Weinstein's obsession over control and profits. Behind the scenes, Weinstein interfered with creative decisions, pressured directors, and even attempted to dictate casting choices in films associated with De Niro's projects. For an actor who had spent his life protecting the purity of his performances, this was intolerable. The deeper betrayal came later, when Weinstein's scandals became public. As dozens of women came forward with allegations of abuse, De Niro, who had once worked closely with Weinstein, found his name uncomfortably linked to the disgraced mogul. Though De Niro was never implicated in Weinstein's crimes, the association cast a shadow over his carefully guarded reputation. For a man who had built a career avoiding scandal, being tied, however indirectly, to Weinstein's empire felt like a betrayal of trust. Miramax itself had also left De Niro feeling used. Promises of long-term collaborations fell apart when Weinstein shifted priorities to other stars and projects, leaving De Niro's ventures underfunded or sidelined. In the end, what had begun as a professional partnership soured into a reminder of Hollywood's ugliest truth. Power players like Weinstein thrived not on loyalty but on exploitation. For De Niro, the Weinstein saga wasn't just another industry squabble. It was proof that even at the top of the mountain, betrayal could find him not through personal heartbreak, but through the corruption of an industry he had given his life to. Robert De Niro had always been cautious with his private life, but when it came to business, he relied heavily on trust. For decades, he surrounded himself with a small circle of partners and advisors who managed his investments, restaurants, and real estate projects. One of the men who earned his confidence was Johnny Boy Civello, a longtime associate who helped De Niro expand his financial empire beyond acting. At first, Civello appeared loyal, helping De Niro secure deals that made headlines: restaurants in Manhattan, boutique hotels, and ambitious film production ventures. De Niro, who was more artist than businessman, believed Civello was guiding him toward long-term stability. But in the shadows, Civello's decisions were quietly draining De Niro's fortune. Mismanaged funds, risky investments, and questionable tax strategies began to mount, leaving De Niro vulnerable to the IRS and drowning in legal paperwork. The betrayal hit hardest when auditors revealed just how reckless Civello had been. Millions were tied up in projects that never materialized, and tax debts spiraled into the tens of millions. For an actor who had spent his life working tirelessly to build financial security, discovering that a man he trusted had jeopardized it all was devastating. Worse still, the fallout was public. Headlines about De Niro's financial struggles painted him as careless with money, a narrative that clashed with his reputation for discipline and focus. Behind the scenes, he was forced to liquidate assets and take on roles in films not always for artistic merit, but to cover mounting expenses. For De Niro, this was more than financial strain. It was humiliation. Johnny Boy's betrayal wasn't splashed across tabloids like a divorce, nor did it carry the scandal of Weinstein's empire. But it cut deeply because it threatened De Niro's legacy. After decades of giving everything to his craft, he found himself scrambling to protect the fortune he thought was safe. Trust, once broken in business, left scars just as painful as betrayal in love. If there was one relationship that defined Robert De Niro's career, it was his bond with Martin Scorsese. From the gritty streets of Mean Streets to the haunting loneliness of Taxi Driver, from the operatic violence of Goodfellas to the aching elegy of The Irishman, their collaboration became one of the greatest actor-director partnerships in cinema history. De Niro was Scorsese's muse, and Scorsese was the filmmaker who unlocked De Niro's deepest talents. Together, they shaped an era. But even the strongest bonds can fracture under the weight of ambition. In the 1990s, as Hollywood shifted toward blockbuster franchises and global spectacle, Scorsese began looking elsewhere for new inspiration. While De Niro was still delivering powerful performances, he was also entering a different phase of his career, older, more selective, less hungry for constant reinvention. Into this gap stepped another actor, Leonardo DiCaprio. The betrayal was not a single act but a slow erosion. Scorsese began casting DiCaprio in films that once would have been natural vehicles for De Niro. Gangs of New York, The Aviator, The Departed, all films where De Niro might once have stood at the center, now belonged to a younger face. For De Niro, who had spent decades as Scorsese's partner in cinematic crime, it felt like watching someone else take his seat at the table he had helped build. What cut deepest was not jealousy, it was abandonment. De Niro had given Scorsese some of the most iconic performances in history, sacrificing body and mind for roles that demanded everything. He had endured the punishing transformation of Raging Bull, the psychological torment of Taxi Driver, the physical toll of Cape Fear. Yet when Scorsese looked to the future, it seemed De Niro was no longer part of it. Though the two men never spoke publicly of a rift, those close to them say De Niro felt wounded, replaced by a younger star while he was still capable of greatness. For a man who valued loyalty above all, Scorsese's shift toward DiCaprio was a quiet but profound betrayal, the kind that doesn't make headlines, but lingers for years. In time, they would reconcile with The Irishman, a monumental return to form that felt like a final chapter for their legendary partnership. But the scar of those years remained. De Niro learned that even the deepest creative brotherhoods can bend to the pressures of time, commerce, and the lure of new blood. The betrayal of Martin Scorsese was not loud or public. It was subtle, gradual, and perhaps inevitable, and that made it the most painful of all. Looking back at 77, Robert De Niro carries both triumph and scars. The betrayals he endured from Grace Hightower in the courtroom, Harvey Keitel in Friendship, Harvey Weinstein in business, Johnny Boy, Civello in finances, and even Martin Scorsese in art form, a painful map of his journey. Each wound tells a story of loyalty tested and trust shattered. Yet through it all, he never stopped working, never stopped pushing himself, and never surrendered the discipline that made him a legend. For De Niro, betrayal became more than just personal heartbreak. It became fuel. It taught him that even those closest to you can turn, that fame can corrode trust, and that the industry he loved could be as merciless as the mobsters he portrayed on screen. Still, he chose resilience. He chose to keep building, to keep acting, and to keep standing tall even when the world seemed determined to cut him down. His story is not one of destruction but of survival. Robert De Niro may have been betrayed, but he was never broken. The same man who once told us, "You talking to me," still speaks to audiences worldwide with his silence, his craft, and his unshakable presence. And in that defiance lies his truest declaration, that no betrayal, no matter how deep, can erase the legacy he carved into Hollywood's history. Robert De Niro's journey reminds us that even legends are not immune to betrayal. Behind the Oscars, the iconic roles, and the unshakable performances lies a man who endured heartbreak, rivalry, financial chaos, and professional abandonment, yet still refused to bow to defeat. His story is a lesson in resilience, a reminder that greatness is not just built on triumphs, but on the battles one survives. Now it's your turn. Which of these betrayals do you think cut the deepest? Was it the personal sting of Grace Hightower, the rivalry with Harvey Keitel, the corruption of Harvey Weinstein, the financial ruin from Johnny Boy Civello, or the creative rift with Martin Scorsese? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want more untold Hollywood stories like this, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the bell so you never miss what's coming next.